I was showing here that the artificial neural networks work the best here because it is able to deal with the complexity of the data. Uh, sorry. Yeah. So, and then usually we know that that the speech science itself and speech technology had a quantum leap after neural networks came into being. Even though it's not a new idea, it has been it has been an old idea. However, could not be implemented because of the power, computational power we had, less computational power we had in the world. But later, post 2000, it saw a quantum leap because of not only because of the new deep neural network algorithms, but also because of the computational power that increased. So the neural networks are better for speech because their ability to capture the contextual variations in speech. So as we have already talked about that in the same sentence, I mean, speech is it's a time defined process. I mean, it just goes on for several seconds at one go. And within those several seconds itself, it changes its characteristics many times. So they also have to take care of in what phonetic context and what environmental context they are spoken. So there are quite a lot of variables which make speech variable for even one person while the person keeps on talking. It does not need to provide. You don't need to provide in the most of the cases in the neural networks. You don't. I mean, modern neural networks. You don't need to provide any features, because as I was saying, that they can identify the features by themselves, and they can take the most important features, extract most important features, and then start modeling based on those important features only. So that you don't. There is no longer any need of handcrafted features or features such as F1 and F2 or MFCCs. If you know about MFCC features, they had they ruled the world of speech recognition for a long time. But now we no longer need them, because the network itself can decide on what it is going to hone on and how it is going to give the best performance using what kind of features. So it can get its features on its own. It's a kind of what we call the end-to-end system in that sense. So the variations in speech captured very well, because in the same speech, when I'm talking to you now, I'm changing. Uri was talking about it also. I'm changing my intonation. My fundamental frequency goes up and down. Sometimes I'm louder. Sometimes I'm softer. And with that, there is a change of background information, background noise also. All that are being captured very well in the neural networks, and that's why it works very well for the speech recognition and speech-related activities. And also, it is able to model complex relationships, as you say. I was talking about the contextual information, how preceding consonant changes the following vowel, etc. All these informations can be very well represented in the very well taken care of by the neural networks as such. However, the only problem is that it needs a large amount of data. We have been talking about it many a times. The point has come up again and again that neural networks, we all know, need a huge amount of data. Of course, there are ways now you can have a network trained with smaller amount of data, but still, that if you want to start something from scratch, of course, you need quite a good amount of data for training these neural networks. Considering that our kind of work, which is basically smaller linguistic data and using the classifiers not to actually build a system as such, not to build a speech recognition system or not to build a text-to-speech synthesis system, but we want to leverage on these technologies so that we can basically use them to, how do I say, like validate certain hypotheses that we have about the language, or we want to validate something about the structure of the language, something about its phonetics, or something about its phonology, etc. In those cases, it is a good idea to have, like, a machine learning algorithm which classifies things well, but does not require at the same time bigger, large data. So we use QDA for that reason. Why to use classifiers again? In many cases, it is not possible for us to validate our hypothesis with native speakers, or, like, it may be cumbersome to do certain kind of experiments also. So certain hypothesis testing can be conducted by means of this the classifiers, and I'll give you some examples of that in the second lecture also. One of the things that I have talked about in the first lecture is that the point that how Assamese vowels differ geographically. For example, from east to west, as I was showing with rhythm also, the vowel quality is also basically changed. And then what we know is that there are 8 vowels in standard Assamese, but as of now, when we speak Assamese, actually these 8 vowels are reduced to smaller sets. So for example, like, as I have talked to you the other day, the O vowel is neutralized to the U vowel in speech. Actually, the U vowel is neutralized to U vowel in the Eastern Assamese. And in case of the, like, Western Assamese variety, that the same vowel is neutralized to the O vowel. So it's some sort of neutralization process that is happening in the Assamese varieties. However, that is, like, very difficult for us to, like, ask to, how do I say, prove that hypothesis with people. The reason being is that many people are aware of how one should speak, right? But they don't speak in that way. However, if you ask them whether, like, this is a correct way of speaking or not, they might give actually different answers. They might say that actually what I am speaking is not correct. And it is very common to say for people that, like, that this is not how they actually speak normally, or they should not be speaking normally. So in those cases, like, we can, like, look at how people are actually processing these kind of vowels with the help of some sort of machine learning techniques, which I'll show you in a little bit. As I have said again, I'm reiterating the point, but, like, you probably have got it by now that the easternmost 2 towns, Tinsukia and Jorhat, they speak the eastern variety. Nagaon speaks the central variety, and Nalbari and Borpeta uses the western variety of Assamese. That is what we have come to know from literature. But has anybody provided any proof for that? No, not really. Right? So in Lina's work and our lab's work, we have been working on this, and we have been trying to see how, how correct this is, whether we can actually, like, categorize things or classify things into 3 different groups or 5 different groups. That's what we have been seeing in different aspects of Assamese speech, sometimes in case of rhythm, sometimes in case of vowel, etc. So in case of vowel, what we have done a few years ago is that we have taken some vowel tokens from these 5 towns, which were about, like, about 14,289 vowel tokens that were produced in both isolation in sentence frame. And then from the 5 regions, we had 72 speakers. So immediately it tells you that the number of speakers was not balanced across all the regions, which is something that, Uri was pointing out to, and I'll show you what happens when you don't have balanced data also. So in case of Assamese data that we collected, what we did is that I'm coming to the point how I'm going to use a classifier in that in a little bit, and to prove what. So the vowels are embedded in the grammatical words in Assamese in CVC kind of syllables. And these are the values that we have extracted. We have got all 3 formants, formant 1, formant 2, and formant 3 at the mid 20%. So if you remember some of the recent literatures, many of our linguist friends would know that we have been doing vowel measurements at the mid of the vowel, but for the last so many years that is a little bit out of trend, and people are saying that we should always get the mid 20% of the vowel calculated because that gives the best kind of approximation to the real production of the vowel. So we are basically doing the mid 20% of the total duration of the vowel. That is where we are getting the F1, F2 and the F3 vowels of the vowels. And also, like, we got duration of each vowel, and also F0 at the vowel midpoint. If you are worried about F0, don't worry about it, because you would have a natural tendency to come out and say that, well, that is gender dependent or person dependent, but we took care of it because we had the normalization done on the data. We used the Lobanov normalization method, which is usually also called the z-score normalization method, which was I cannot recall who talked about it first. That was the best method. Nevertheless, that's not the most important thing, but what is the this normalization method doing? Basically what it does is that it takes a vowel or any sort of speech signal, like such as F0 or any kind of spectral kind of values, and then basically deducts subtracts the speaker average from it, right, and then divides it by standard deviation of all the values. What happens is that then all the variations are also being taken care of. So if you do z-score normalization, then you, as I was showing you the other day, you get some values for vowels not in hertz anymore, but in some values between -1 or -2 to all the way to +1 and +2, something of that sort. Right, so it is a normalization. Basically what you are doing is that you are taking the data and putting the speaker out of the data. So what we did is that here to capture because the vowels are not only they are not steady, right? We always think that the vowels are monophthongs are always steady, but they are not steady, and it has been shown in certain studies that the movement of the F1, F2 are actually important cue in vowel identification in certain languages. So what we did is that we basically took the first 3 density coefficients of 3 form and trajectories. Now, what is density coefficient? So this is exactly what I was talking about to you earlier, that how I can reduce a large information into smaller bits of information, right? So density is a method by which we take the total the vowel formant values at different points of the vowel. However, we run it through the DCT conversion algorithm, by which we can get certain coefficients, certain markers. For example, DCT coefficient number 1, DCT coefficient number 2, number 3, and you can go n number of coefficient, but we don't need that many. 2 or 3, that is what we need. We just got 3 of them, right? So these DCT coefficients, what they do is that C0, the first coefficient which we extract, C0 is nothing but the average of the total duration of the vowel formant, right? C1 is nothing but the slope, one-way slope of the total vowel formant trajectory. Basically it is a half cosine, and then C2 is a full cosine, so it goes like this and this, right? And it compares the whole vowel trajectory with those shapes and gives a number how much it matches with the trajectories, right? This is exactly the method by which this was first used in JPG format. So that is how your large photo files become small, because they save it in these coefficients and then recreate it. And in the second talk I'll also show you how we have actually captured with 3 coefficients. We have captured the tone, complete mesotones, but again we reproduced it with just those 3 coefficients, just like what you do with your JPG file every day. When you are clicking on it, the algorithm goes and then just takes the information from the minimum number of coefficients and produces a nice picture to you. So we basically took the first three DCT coefficients, right? So these are basically telling us about the form and how the form and trajectory is going up, down, or up, down, etc. So we also had like information about the speakers, the vowels, gender, context, whether it was spoken in a sentence or in isolation, what was the preceding consonant, what is the following consonant, onset and coda, etc., etc., and we just subjected it to a classifier. What is the classifier we used? We used something called the random forest classifier, and I was just mentioning a little bit earlier about this random forest classifier, which is one of my favorite classifiers because it does some sort of decision tree wise calculation of the best score it can get for a particular category. It is a little bit complex, but I have, we are in the break, I have actually a small PPT where I have shown all the branching, how it makes the decision. So I'll be happy to show you that in the break. So we use the random forest classifier. I don't want to go into the details of it because so basically what you know is that the number of trees, decision trees we have, the more complex decision trees we have with more number of features, the better results that we are expecting to get. And there are many of these parameters that you have to define in the random forest classification. For example, how many trees do you want? How many nodes should be in each? How many nodes should be in each tree, etc. And that we basically do. What we do is that we have in our SMEs data case, I think we ran it for 5 or 6 days together on a computer continuously until we get the best value, which is not a very smart way of doing it, but we did it that way because we did not know how to do it in a better way at that point of time. So we did it that way, and we found out what could give us the best trees, what could give us the best nodes, etc. So when we did that, when we subjected this data there, and we asked the system that okay, tell us now, if I give you unlabeled data, right, can you predict all these regions? When we gave Borpeta unlabeled data, only 22% of that data that we have, unlabeled data from Borpeta we have given, it was able to do it correctly. If you go to Jorhat, 100% of times. If you go to Nagaon, 100% of time, Nalbari 97.4% of time, Tinsukia 0, right? And all the Tinsukia data was recognized as Jorhat. Not a good classification overall. It's a failure basically, right? Can you guess why this data is read as Jorhat data? Both of them are Eastern, right? So some of these classifiers have this bad habit that if your data is not balanced, right, it is biased towards the class which has more amount of data, right? And random forest is basically infamous for that, right? There is a whole paper on the bias on this kind of what is that called? Unbalanced data bias in a random forest classification, right? So what we did is that when we subjected this data initially there, we subjected it completely unbiased, where Jorhat data was quite a lot. So as a result of that, everything was more or less going towards there. The Tinsukia data was going towards there, right? And as a result of that, Borpeta also had lower accuracy because Nalbari had more data, right? So there all these problems were happening at that time. Oopsie. I will not go to this now, but I'll show you what happened. This is when we changed the data, we made the data balanced. How did we make it balanced? There is no other way. there are two ways actually. Either you produce more data, right? People basically what they do is that they have some data augmentation method by which they increase the data. For example, you add a little bit of noise there or change certain parameters and make the classes equal. Or the best is that they will go to the lowest minimum, right, and keep everything in that. So that is what we did, and then this is what we have got. Now we are getting pretty good performance here. The average accuracy has gone up to about 94%. That is not the point. This accuracy, we are most of the times when we are doing this kind of classification, we are hung on this accuracy. But it is not the accuracy that we are interested in. We are interested in the fact that just by looking into F1, F2, F3, and duration of vowels, only vowel characteristics, we are able to get 94% classification of the dialects. That matters to us more. Even if it had been more than chance level, I would have been happy, and that has happened in as you know, I have given you several examples. In many cases, we have got it only above the chance level, right? So this is working fine, but more important thing is that it is not about getting it automatically classified, but what we understand from that. What we understand from that is that in these 5 areas, the inherent properties of vowels are very much region specific, right? And that is probably why somebody who comes from Borpeta can immediately be recognized by somebody who is from Tinsukia area, right? But for me as a Tinsukia area person, a speaker, it will be very difficult for me to distinguish between the Nalbari and the Borpeta person, right? Because I know that is Western, but I don't know how to subdivide it. But from within the Borpeta area, again within the Western area, all the different groups, subgroups, they can actually distinguish each other's speech, right? But this guy is doing much better because it has information equally about all classes, right? I, as a speaker of Eastern Assam, I don't have equal data for all the areas. I have only more data. Actually, I am biased more towards the Upper Assam or Eastern Assam variety, right? I have no idea. I know that this is not us, but I don't know what are the subclasses in that, right? Because I myself is not exposed to balanced data set. So this is again actually still unbalanced data, but then we, how do I say, group them together according to Eastern, Western, and Central, and then it gets a little bit better here, 94, 61, and 88, etc. But that doesn't again help us. Actually, it is happening because the data is now more in each group, but still you can see immediately Central has only one place. As a result of that, the accuracy is much more lower. So in these cases, I have proved the hypothesis using the balanced data here. But one point is that I should be very careful to collect balanced database a priori, right? So what we know now is that these classifiers that we are using here, we are not using the classifiers actually only for the for speech recognition or TTS, etc. But what we are trying to do is that we are trying to use it for some sort of hypothesis testing, which will give us some insights into the phonetics and the phonology of the languages. What we also know is that there are many such classifiers. Some classifiers are much better, which can take care of this inherent bias of the amount of data by themselves, but some classifiers are very bad at that, right? And so they are inherently biased towards the class which has the highest amount of data. And then, as I said, the random forest classification, which we have talked about just now, it is known to be prone to errors due to the imbalanced data classes. So balanced data class, balanced data sets, they basically increase your accuracy. Yeah, so this is a very good question from Somini, that the classification of these dialects is very much vowel specific. Has there been any study on analyzing other sound properties like consonants, stops, clusters, semivowels, etc., which can help distinguish Assamese dialects or distinguish dialects in general in research? Well, people have done different such kind of studies, but not for probably for Assamese. Assamese, we have done rhythm studies, as you have seen earlier. I cannot recall at the top of my head right now such studies, but for example, semivowels are already done in case of the English varieties, right? That is where that paper was, which talked about this, calculating the mid 20% of the vowels, where they looked into the monophthongs and the diphthongs. So there are studies on diphthongs. We have looked into Indian English diphthongs to some extent, but consonants as such to check dialect distinction, I cannot recall any acoustics, such kind of acoustic or machine learning based studies at this point of time. Uri, do you have any input on that? Yeah. So Uri also does not have any input on that, but if we come to know, if we get to remember something, then I'll surely share it. But another thing that I just wanted to mention while you asked this question is that that is why, when you do these kind of work, such as getting consonant information, vowel information, or semi-vowel information, that is dependent on the segmentation, and good segmentation. So quality of segmentation, how you have annotated the data matters a lot. And one of the reasons why we are doing it today, this particular course, is to show you that without probably taking that kind of micro level details, or that micro level details can also be captured in larger chunks of data without having to do very micro level analysis like what we have done in the past. I don't know if I made my point clear or not, but that is what I wanted to say, that that's why we are doing this course, that's so that we don't have to look into such micro details, but larger chunks of data can still capture such micro variations. That's what the point is.
Yeah, so theoretically things are clear. It'll be great if you can in brief explain the whole process, everything.
So what you are saying is that
the steps.
What is that called? Hands-on. If you can do a hands-on, that is what we are going to do. In a tutorial session. Lecture sessions are mostly for theory, and then tutorials we do hands-on.
Okay, great.
So that the files that were shared with all of you by WhatsApp, they should open automatically once you put them on your Google Drive, right? So that is something that, but anyway, yeah, let's do it in the afternoon, so let's not get confused on that, but it's coming.
So building on what Shomni was saying, is there a reason why most of the studies that we've looked at here are so vowel specific? Is it because there is, simply in numbers there are less vowels than there are consonants, or is it that is it easier to find intonation and pitch in vowels versus consonants, or is there another reason?
I think as I also mentioned in the first lecture, that some things that we do are based on what we know a priori, right? That there will be vowel variation, but everybody talks about it, but we actually don't know what that is. So that kind of curiosity basically leads to these kind of research. And also if you look into individual scholars or individual phoneticians, then you will see that each phonetician has some sort of interest or some sort of fascination for certain 20 millisecond segment of speech, right? So unfortunately, most of the people who were working on those projects happen to be those who are interested in vowels. And one of the reasons why I also talk about vowels more is because everybody has vowels. Well, everybody has consonants too, but but everybody may not have tones, for example. So that is why I like to give it more examples from vowels. But in the second half, in the second part of the talk, I'm going to give completely tones.
Again, maybe Priyanka sort of mentioned that earlier, but this all of the sort of phonetic detail and analysis of phonetic detail depends on how we operationalize the given question. So for the vowels, we have the straightforward or well-established way of operationalizing the differences in vowel quality in terms of formants, for example, and formant movement. In consonants, it's much more complicated, But there is a huge, actually, field, one of the biggest sort of areas of research in terms of consonants and in phonetics overall, and it's a voice onset time studies, because this is a very important feature in West Germanic languages, and of course, traditionally the field was dominated by the Brits and the Dutch and the Germans, where this particular thing is very, very, very dominant and very interesting to distinguish some particular things about those languages. So VOT, voice onset time, is one of the possible operationalizations of dealing with consonants. But consonants are so varied that the VOT is not necessarily relevant for many languages, for many voiced consonants, for whatever clicks, or for many other fricatives and many other types of consonants. So consonants are very difficult to study as a group and study sort of cross-linguistically. That's what Priyanka was saying. Everybody has vowels. Vowels are quite straightforward to study cross-linguistically, but consonants are much more varied and much more. It's quite difficult to do typology on consonants, in particular if you want to do it in a quantified way. So you want to do very signal-based, because it's very difficult to operationalize them. Of course, there is a possibility that some of the things which our black box solutions actually are black box approaches actually dealing is that they capture some of the consonants. This is gonna be, we are gonna discuss this on Friday, because this is gonna be this is the biggest task we have ahead after we finish this course, to figure out what we're actually looking at and how can we zoom into some particular questions, like looking at, I don't know, VOT for the measure if we want to replicate some work by somebody else, and consonants and consonantal dictionaries and whatever, vocabularies and all of those type of things. So yeah, consonants are tough. Vowels are easy, tones are relatively easy, but consonants are tough, and it's not very well defined area of investigating consonants, as it were.
Yeah, another thing is that you see, the duration of the consonants usually is very short, Secondly, as Uri was saying, if you think about even fricatives, there are only a few measures that you can actually take from fricatives. They are not, nothing has actually come up. We have celebrated 50 years of VOT, right? But nothing has happened in case of the other sounds, for example. They are still waiting for their day.
Importantly, whatever measures you take from fricatives are completely irrelevant for some plosives, or completely relevant for I don't know,
contexts, for example.
Yeah, or many other types of consonants. So it's sort of very difficult to compare the realizations of consonants overall, because it's difficult to find what you measure. And of course, even how long are consonants? It's what is a part of consonants? The full closure, the part of the consonant, the burst part of the consonant, all of those things are sort of, and they are very language dependent, potentially dialect dependent, potentially even sort of idiosyncratic in some cases. So this is difficult one.
So nasals, for example, if you look into Styler's work on nasals, then you see that for every language the characteristics change so much that you cannot use this measurement in X language, that measurement in Y language, etc., etc.